The US looks to China for support over Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea as Australia responds over its contribution to a maritime force. A setback for Donald Trump and his 2024 presidential ambitions, with Colorado using a constitutional clause to disqualify him. No threat to life, but Iceland's volcanic eruption and seismic activity could go on for months. Isolated communities pose a challenge to authorities as Queensland's Premier launches a drive to support flood victims. I'm Janice Petersen. This is SBS World News. Good evening. The US is looking to China, among other countries, for support in addressing attacks by Houthi rebels on commercial ships in the Red Sea. It's launched a multinational security force to address the issue, which market analysts warn could further impact the global economy.
US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin arrived in Qatar, his latest stop in a Middle East tour. Earlier, in Bahrain, he addressed sailors at US Naval Headquarters, detailing the American-led Operation Prosperity Guardian.
That operation is bringing together more than a dozen countries from around the world to conduct joint patrols in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden.
It's in response to Houthi attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea, but it's not clear how far each of the countries in the coalition is willing to go in protecting the vessels.
What I think is necessary in the Red Sea is to make sure that shipping can keep moving, can keep delivering oil, can keep delivering goods, and so this maritime task force that is being set up is looking for partners to help to allow that to happen, and Britain is going to be one of those partners, and I think Italy is going to be one of those partners too.
The Yemen-based Houthis say they're attacking vessels with links to Israel in support of Hamas and Palestinians. The US conducting a review on whether to designate the group a terrorist organisation.
The Houthis may be pulling the trigger, but as I've said, Iran's giving them the guns.
The US now looking to China for support.
Where China could be helpful, quite frankly, is more with the influence that we know they have in Tehran, the conversations that they can have with the supreme leader. And we have in the past, and we continue to encourage the Chinese to use that influence, use those conversations to lean on the supreme leader and Iran to stop their support for the Houthis.
A number of major companies, including shipping firms MSC and Maersk, have suspended journeys through the Red Sea following the attacks, as has oil giant BP. The Red Sea is linked to the Mediterranean by the Suez Canal, making it the shortest maritime route between Europe and Asia. The alternative route via southern Africa adds around 10 days to the journey and far increases costs.
If you just look at the numbers, the Suez Canal accounts for more than 10% of global trade, more than 30% of container transportation. So if this canal is really blocked, it means bad news for world trade, bad news for the global economy, and bad news for inflation.
Analysts warning the price of oil and other goods could spike as a result. Tanya Dendrinos, SBS World News.
And Australia is one of the countries the US has requested assistance from. SBS political correspondent Pablo Vinales joins us now from Parliament House in Canberra. Good evening, Pablo. This request was made last week, so what's the government's response?
Janice, good evening to you. Well, the Prime Minister hasn't explicitly said whether or not the government will send a warship to the Red Sea, but it appears unlikely. It bears noting this request by the United States was made to a number of nations, and yesterday, Australia signing a joint statement from 44 allies and partner nations condemning the interference. The statement says the numerous attacks originating from Houthi-controlled territories in Yemen threaten international commerce and maritime security. There is no justification for these attacks, which affect many countries beyond the flags these ships sail under. Last night, the Chief of Defence Force, Angus Campbell, took part in a call with the US-led naval coalition known as Operation Prosperity Guardian. Anthony Albanese was asked about this today, saying the government is considering sending personnel to support the operation in Bahrain, while the opposition has been scathing of the response.
We're one of the 39 countries in the combined maritime force. We are making a contribution there, We've said that we'll examine further personnel as well being there. And the US is keen for Australian diplomatic and public support. We provided that along with New Zealand.
He's contributing to a joint statement. Well, I've got news for the Prime Minister. Press releases don't shoot down drones, warships do. Our allies will be very concerned quietly about this response from Australia.
There are currently no Australian warships in the Red Sea. HMAS Toowoomba was pulled out under the Morrison government in 2020. Janice.
Thanks so much. That's Pablo Vinales updating us from Parliament House in Canberra. Former US President Donald Trump has been disqualified from the 2024 presidential ballot in Colorado. The state Supreme Court ruled he's ineligible to run in a majority decision under the US Constitution's insurrection clause. Mr. Trump's campaign says it will appeal to the US Supreme Court.
Donald Trump campaigning in Waterloo, Iowa, just hours after a stunning ruling by Colorado's Supreme Court. Making no comment on the decision, the former president with his usual attack lines.
Joe Biden is a threat to democracy. It's a threat.
But whether Trump will get to take on Biden, at least in Colorado, now in question. The majority of justices stating, "We do not reach these conclusions lightly. We are mindful of the magnitude and weight of the questions now before us. We are likewise mindful of our solemn duty to apply the law." The court ruling Trump is disqualified from holding the office of president under Section 3 of the US Constitution's 14th Amendment. Ratified after the American Civil War, it prevents insurrectionists from holding office.
The Colorado Supreme Court has determined that Donald Trump did engage in insurrection and that his actions have disqualified him from being president. I just think the gravity of that in itself is just remarkable.
Trump's campaign team with a different take. The Colorado Supreme Court issued a completely flawed decision. We have full confidence that the US Supreme Court will quickly rule in our favour and finally put an end to these un-American lawsuits. Colorado officials say the issue must be settled by the 5th of January. That's the deadline for the state to print its presidential primary ballots. The Colorado litigants overjoyed.
But we're thrilled. I'm very proud to be a Coloradan and an American today because this is what it means to have the rule of law, where you're given a fair shake.
Court cases to keep Donald Trump off the ballot in other states have failed, but more cases may now follow. Trump's Republican presidential rivals not welcoming the decision.
I do not believe Donald Trump should be prevented from being president of the United States by any court.
In Iowa, Trump keeping up his anti-immigration rhetoric.
They're ruining our country, and it's true. They're destroying the blood of our country. That's what they're doing. They're destroying our country. They don't like it when I said that, and I never read Mein Kampf.
Donald Trump doesn't need Colorado, which he lost by 13 points in 2020, in order to win next year's presidential election. His campaign is already fundraising off the court's decision. Pruluan, SBS World News.
The death toll from an earthquake that struck a mountainous region in northwestern China has risen to at least 127. More than 800 people have been injured. The magnitude 6.2 earthquake rocked Gansu and neighbouring Qinghai province just before midnight local time. Rescuers are braving the cold in the hopes of finding more survivors.
Homes reduced to rubble, leaving residents outside in a below-freezing winter night. More than 900 people found refuge in a temporary shelter in the Hill village, where 102 tents were hastily set up. Each tent equipped with food and a stove, as well as cotton quilts and mattresses to help residents through the cold night. Authorities have mobilised an array of emergency responses after the quake destroyed roads and infrastructure. Rescuers from Gansu province desperately working to save the stranded.
我们坚决贯彻习主席命令指示，连夜组织多支陆空救援力量赶赴灾区一线，展开灾情勘查、人员搜救、伤员转运和群众安置等工作。
But rescue work is proving to be a challenge as most of the country grapples with freezing conditions. Qinghai officials have reported 20 people missing, who they say were buried in a landslide. Local hospitals also bolstering existing facilities, with more than 155 medical workers and emergency response vehicles dispatched to aid survivors.
我们来了这个4辆应急救援车，我们这个车呢是可以做简单的手术的，可以做简单的拍片，还有我们检验车。
China's Vice Premier Zhang Guoqing rushed to disaster-hit areas to oversee relief work. He also visited some of the injured before presiding over a meeting to discuss next steps. Western China is prone to earthquakes, some of them deadly. This latest quake is the worst the country has seen in nearly a decade. Mahnoz Angudi, SBS World News.
Well, the water might be subsiding, but a long road to recovery lays ahead for communities in far north Queensland hit hard by this week's flooding. Authorities hold grave concerns for an 85-year-old man who's been missing from a small community near Cape Tribulation since Sunday. Many residents now face months of cleaning up, with some likely to be left homeless over the holiday period.
The Premier posing for pictures as he toured flood-ravaged Cairns, inspecting damage at Holloway's Beach, one of the worst affected areas. Down the road, locals were doing their bit.
Washing powder we need.
Much needed clothing, household essentials and water donated at this supply hub.
This is just a point of access where anyone who's been affected by the floods can actually come down, grab whatever they need.
Daniel Cairns is among those whose homes were impacted. Like many others, he wants to do what he can to help his mates.
Devastating to say, but yeah, there's going to be a lot of homeless people.
With nothing, and with no house to go back to.
Residents of all ages lending a hand.
We weren't affected, but so many of our friends were, and as soon as we could get out here, we just wanted to try and hand out free coffee and food to, people that have lost everything.
Government loans and additional disaster relief payments have been announced for primary producers and small businesses. But in a region reliant on tourism, they need more than that.
The best assets up here in the world, and we'd love to see as many people coming back because that's one of the things that is going to help our region.
Brian Hennessy's business ground to a halt this month.
We haven't had full operations since the 7th of December. That was in the lead up to Cyclone Jasper and then obviously the rain event afterwards.
Today, he finally welcomed people back.
Thank you so much and welcome aboard. Thank you.
But it's hurt his bottom line.
We've probably lost something like 3,000 people that we would have carried over that period. So you're talking in excess of $600,000.
While the immediate threat is over, the full recovery will be long and costly.
And it can easily be in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars when it comes to just clean up alone. We are looking at a very expensive repair bill. There is no doubt about it.
Work is now well underway to assess the extent of damage from this disaster. Already almost 500 homes have been identified as being impacted, but with vast areas still cut off by flooding, that figure is expected to keep rising. Close to 100 people from the Aboriginal community of Wudjil Wudjil were evacuated to Cooktown yesterday. That operation continuing today. Many likely to be left homeless there and across the region.
We will then identify temporary accommodation for them and, if required, longer-term housings.
Tonight, power is being restored to the 14,000 premises that were cut off. It's expected connection will be restored to 90% of those properties by tomorrow night.
And reporter Tom Stainer joins us now from Cairns. Good evening, Tom. A massive clean-up, of course, continuing in that region. How's the response from authorities unfolding?
Janice, the flood response has been gathering pace, but 35 localities north of Cairns are still cut off, with some major highways still blocked due to the impact of flooding. Resupplying these isolated communities is now a focus for authorities as concerns persist over their access to essential supplies as well as power and clean drinking water. As the response also continues to unfold in areas of Cairns impacted, the Premier today announced $1.5 million would be pledged towards an appeal fund to be led by aid groups and support flood victims. That's on top of disaster payments that have already been announced. But we know that that support won't be getting out the door immediately for everyone. Just finally, Janice, the Prime Minister is expected to arrive in Cairns later tomorrow.
Thanks so much, Tom Stainer, joining us there from Cairns. Well, coming up, the non-nuclear policy is non-negotiable. The message from New Zealand's Prime Minister in talks with his Australian counterpart. Defiant speeches to rally the troops. The leaders of Russia and Ukraine both declare they're achieving their military goals. And why the ACCC has imposed fines and penalties on Airbnb. The spectacular volcanic eruption in Iceland appears to be flowing away from residential areas, providing some hope that lives and homes will be spared. But authorities warn the seismic activity could last for months, and there's concern about gas pollution in the country's capital.
It is both breathtakingly beautiful and incredibly destructive. After weeks of warnings and intense earthquake activity, lava is now flowing across the land of fire and ice. Locals and tourists have been told to stay away, but for some, the temptation is too great.
I'm very excited to be here in this place, in this time, and just being able to see this natural phenomenon happen, just seeing lava emerge from the ground. It's just fascinating to see just nature in action. It's just like something from a movie.
The eruption has occurred in an area with little infrastructure, and the lava's flowing mostly to the north, away from populated areas. It's around 30 kilometres to Reykjavik, the capital, and even closer to the international airport. The Blue Lagoon, the popular geothermal spa, remains closed. At the most risk, although safe for now, is the fishing town of Grindavik. It was evacuated weeks ago when huge cracks in the ground started to appear. For a while, things quietened down, and residents had hoped they'd be able to return soon.
So we were actually thinking, wow, maybe we will be able to have Christmas and New Year's Eve at home.
That's not going to happen.
We have cleared the town and the area, and now we're just securing the area and closing every road to the area, and that's just in process now. But then we are just trying to manage the situation here.
Residents now expect they'll be away from home for many more weeks.
They probably think there's a chance that it opens up somewhere else and then it's going to be closer to Grindavik. So I don't see that in the near future they will let people get close to Grindavik. So we are back in the waiting game.
Icelandic authorities built enormous defences for lava to be channelled away from towns, and they may still come into play if the flow changes direction.
This is a huge eruption. We've yet to see how it will develop throughout the day. In the meantime, I can say that lava seems to be flowing in the convenient direction, but we also know the flow of lava can change the surrounding landscape, so this can change with short notice.
While the impact to this part of Iceland will be enormous, the eruption is unlikely to cause the same travel chaos as the volcanic eruption of 2010, which grounded flights across Europe for days.
You'd be hard put to find two very different contrasting eruptions from this eruption to Eyjafjallajökull, which erupted in 2010. What came out in 2010 was a type of magma that fragments very easily into fine ash. And the combination of weather, wind, and dry conditions meant this ash was in the sky for a very long time. What's coming out of this eruption is unlikely to cause any problem to international air travel.
The main concern now, gases emerging from beneath the ground, poisoning the air. But for the moment, the Icelandic government is confident there's no threat to life. Ben Lewis, SBS World News.
The UN's Security Council vote on a ceasefire in Gaza has been delayed for a second day, with negotiations underway to avoid a third US veto. A new round of talks between Israel and Hamas could be close too, with the Israeli president saying his country is ready to negotiate another pause in fighting in exchange for more hostages. And a warning, this story contains distressing images.
Flattened in the middle of the night. Local authorities say at least 28 people were killed when Israeli forces struck this apartment block in Rafah. Among the dead, a newborn baby, born and killed in war. As the death toll reported by Gaza's health ministry climbed closer to 20,000, a UN Security Council vote on the latest resolution to stop the fighting and increase aid deliveries was delayed a second time. Intense negotiations over its wording are unfolding in New York. The draft first called for an urgent cessation of hostilities. Those words were then reportedly watered down to an urgent suspension, an apparent effort to avoid another US veto.
We are engaging constructively with our colleagues on the Security Council to resolve outstanding issues related to that resolution. Ultimately, we'll make our own determination about what the best course of action is, and it will depend very much on what the final text of the resolution states.
As Israeli media reported, the IDF's operations in Gaza are about to expand. There are also signs a new round of negotiations between Israel and Hamas could soon begin.
Israel is ready for another humanitarian pause and additional humanitarian aid in order to enable the release of hostages.
Fresh from a meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister, some of the hostages' families were optimistic.
The Prime Minister gave us hope in the meeting. It was a very intimate meeting with a small number of families.
Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh is now travelling to Egypt, which helped broker the last hostage deal. But publicly, Hamas, designated a terrorist group by Australia, is insisting it won't negotiate unless the war in Gaza stops.
We affirm our position of categorically rejecting to hold any form of negotiations over prisoners exchange under the continuing Israeli genocidal war.
The situation in Gaza now so desperate, aid convoys enter escorted by security to stop the starving raiding the trucks. Claudia Farhat, SBS World News.
UN peacekeepers will be gradually withdrawn from the Democratic Republic of the Congo following a vote in the Security Council. It comes as the country hosts presidential and parliamentary elections with 44 million people eligible to vote. The withdrawal of peacekeepers will start later this month. That's a year earlier than originally planned and comes despite United Nations concerns about violence in the east of the country. The current government considers the UN force to be ineffective in protecting civilians from the armed groups that have operated in the eastern DRC for 3 decades. Protesters have taken to the streets after a controversial immigration bill was approved in Parliament. The tougher rules will delay welfare payments to foreigners currently in the country and make it harder for migrants to bring family members to France. An earlier draft failed after MPs from the far left and far right voted it down for opposing reasons. Opponents of populist President Aleksandar Vučić have demonstrated against alleged voter fraud in the Serbian capital after he claimed a commanding victory in parliamentary and local elections. An international monitoring mission said the Serbian Progressive Party gained what it said was an unfair advantage through irregularities. Demonstrators are demanding their vote be annulled and that new elections be held. Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin say they're on track to achieve their military goals in defiant speeches aimed at rallying their troops after almost 2 years of war. The Ukrainian president said he was confident of continued Western support, while the Kremlin leader declared that Russian forces had seized the initiative on the battlefield.
President Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky.
It's been another tough year for Volodymyr Zelensky. The long-awaited counter-offensive failed to gain ground, and now his forces face ammunition shortages and dwindling Western support. At his end-of-year news conference, the questions came thick and fast.
Is there a danger that Ukraine could be on the cusp of starting to lose this war?
No. I don't think so. We were in the most difficult situation, and we were almost fully occupied. The risk you are talking about, it always exists. But we have to live here in Ukraine and to fight and keep faith.
Mr. Zelensky insisted that Russia had failed to achieve its goals and said his government is considering mobilizing another 500,000 troops. He said he was confident of continued US support, even though a $90 billion aid package remained stalled in the Senate.
History will look back if we don't support our ally in Ukraine and regard it as a major negative turning point for the US and the Western world.
Vladimir Putin, meanwhile, is sounding confident.
All attempts to inflict a military defeat on us, a strategic defeat, as the West called it, these attempts have been shattered by the courage and persistence of our soldiers.
It's an image he's keen to portray. The commander-in-chief leading a modern, well-equipped fighting force. But other voices are starting to be heard. This soldier says he was drafted a year ago and expresses dismay that there's no end in sight. His message was shared by a group of mothers and wives of mobilised soldiers who want time limits on deployments. It's a brave move in a country where dissent is not tolerated and where patriotic slogans proliferate. Victory is ours, say these billboards in Moscow. Russia, the country of winners. The capital is preparing to see in the new year. Elsewhere, there's little cause for celebration. Bring my husband back. Bring my dad home, read the messages on this tree. Christmas wishes, unlikely to be granted. Nick Wells, SBS World News.
New Zealand Prime Minister Christopher Luxon has made his first official trip to Australia as leader. He's just 3 weeks into the job after more than a month of negotiations to form government. After talks with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese on expanding military cooperation, he said New Zealand will do its share of heavy lifting.
Off to a flying start, Christopher Luxon making his first overseas trip as New Zealand's new Prime Minister, the third Kiwi leader welcomed to Australia this year.
Sorry about the weather. No, it's all good.
From different sides of the political divide, but old friends. The leaders first met when Christopher Luxon was Air New Zealand's chief executive and Anthony Albanese Transport Minister.
Our relationship is not starting, it's continuing.
The Trans-Tasman talks spanning the economy, regional security and defence, with the foreign and defence ministers slated to meet in the new year.
New Zealand is committed to doing our share of the heavy lifting in the alliance.
Keen to join a non-nuclear component of the AUKUS Defence Pact, Pillar 2 to focus on sharing advanced military technology.
We'll always have our nuclear-free position, that's non-negotiable for us in New Zealand. But we already have our navies that work together in an incredibly interoperable way, and we want to see more interoperability, frankly, between our respective defence forces.
Nuclear propulsion, not nuclear armed ships. It's a very important distinction. to draw.
As Christopher Luxon acquaints himself with regional leaders, it's his government's approach to Indigenous policy that's followed him across the Tasman. After just 3 weeks in power, his Conservative coalition has already moved to disband the Māori Health Authority and limit the use of Māori language in the public service. Accused by Te Pāti Māori, or the Māori Party, of bringing race relations in Aotearoa to their lowest point since colonisation.
Do you think you've steered New Zealand off course?
Well, look, I disagree completely. We have differences of opinion about how to deliver improved outcomes for Māori.
Anthony Albanese also pushed on how he will improve outcomes for Indigenous Australians, seldom mentioned since the failed Voice to Parliament referendum.
We respect the outcome, but that does not change our commitment to making a practical difference to close that gap.
More on that promised in the new year. Sarah Tomevska, SBS World News.
Police are calling for drivers to be cautious over the holiday period after 3 people were killed this morning in a single vehicle crash on a regional New South Wales highway. 3 backseat passengers from the vehicle were declared dead at the scene on the Kamilaroi Highway south of Gunnedah in the state's north. The driver was uninjured, but a female front seat passenger was flown to John Hunter Hospital in a serious condition. An air and sea search has failed to find a teenager missing after being swept into the ocean off the Victoria coast. The 14-year-old had been swimming in rock pools last night around a popular blowhole near Cape Bridgewater, about 380 kilometres southwest of Melbourne. Police say the boy was with a 15-year-old friend at the time.
I think it's a reminder of the ocean can be a hostile and unpredictable environment, and I think it's a larger wave has caught them unawares and washed them off the rocks and into the ocean.
A second teenager was able to hold onto a rock and scramble to shore. He received minor cuts and abrasions. Well, the Santa rally continues on financial markets with both Australian shares and the dollar hitting multi-month highs. SBS Finance editor Ricardo Gonçalves has been watching it very closely and joins us now with the details. So, Ricardo, some Christmas cheer coming early for investors.
Janice, and it all has to do with the future direction of global interest rates, which has had a pretty obvious effect on our share market today, hitting a fresh 10-month high. And at the end of October, the ASX 200 was actually in negative territory for the year, but has since staged a dramatic recovery to be up 11% in just 7 weeks and is less than 100 points from a record high.
It's been led by the miners, the banks and most recently real estate. And so we've seen that the Santa rally has come early this year.
It's taking Wall Street's lead, where its benchmark S&P 500 is now just within 1 percentage point of its all-time closing high, reached in January 2022. Investors continuing to analyse any piece of commentary coming out of the US Fed Reserve as its economy slows.
Right now, I think the Fed is saying that there's a possibility that there will be 3 rate cuts in 2024, probably starting in the second quarter, maybe even the middle of the year.
So, by the close, the ASX 200 added 0.7% on high volumes, despite many fund managers being away on holidays. Telstra added nearly 2%. Wesfarmers did well. Westpac was the best of the banks, but Kathmandu owner KMD Brands declined on a weak trading update. The Australian dollar reached a 5-month high against the greenback and is approaching 68 US cents, and is firmer against the British sterling and Chinese yuan. Insurers are starting to count the cost of ex-tropical cyclone Jasper, which has brought extensive flooding to far north Queensland. Suncorp says it has received around 900 claims, including more than 650 homes since Sunday. IAG, whose brands include NRMA, CGU and WFI, says so far it has received 229 claims. Both say claims can be lodged 24/7. The ACCC says consumers and businesses will pay higher prices and have less choice if it isn't given the tools it needs to block anti-competitive mergers. Responding to a recent Treasury paper on merger reform, it says there is currently no law requiring companies to merge to notify the consumer watchdog. That makes Australia an outlier compared with OECD economies. It adds those that do give it the heads up do so late. It describes that as a delaying tactic, which brings pressures not to oppose transactions.
We are looking to have a mandatory suspensory regime, by mandatory we mean that parties seeking to merge who are above a certain size or threshold are required, and it's a breach of our law if they don't notify. So step one, they have to notify. And step two, they can't proceed, they're suspended until we have conducted an assessment and decided that there is not likely to be a substantial lessening of competition.
The ACCC admits it would require more resources as a result. Meanwhile, the ACCC instigated action will see short-term accommodation online platform Airbnb pay $15 million in penalties and up to $15 million in customer compensation after admittedly misleading consumers about the currency used for pricing on its site. It meant around 70,000 customers were charged in US dollars rather than Australian between January 2018 and August 2021 without disclosure. Impacted customers will be contacted by Airbnb within the next 45 days to lodge a claim. Protections of superannuation accounts of low and middle income earners are said to be strengthened with a federal government grant assisting consumer advocacy group Super Consumers Australia. It will receive $5 million over 5 years to help it provide independent research and act on the behalf of super fund members.
One issue that we're hearing about more often currently is around simple customer service and complaints handling when it comes to your superannuation. People are having a long time to resolve issues, delays, having to escalate their matter to the Ombudsman service. We would like to look into ways to ensure customer service is more effective and efficient.
It will also work on the effective use of retirement savings. The Google Play Store will undergo a revamp to allow for greater competition in response to an antitrust lawsuit. Parent company, Alphabet, has agreed to pay $700 million to plaintiffs and consumers to settle allegations it was hindering competition. US state attorneys say the ruling will result in more innovation from developers and lower consumer prices.
Today's settlement, as well as our active lawsuits, send a clear message not just to Google, but to all corporations doing business in California. If you use your power to illegally bend the market at the expense of consumers, small business owners, and the economy, we'll hold you accountable.
All 50 US states joined the settlement. Google has denied any wrongdoing. And petrol prices may have reached record highs in many parts of the country this year, but some motorists are set to receive a reprieve this Christmas. The NRMA says these are the current average prices across Australia's capitals, and if you see a green arrow in your capital city, it means those prices are about to fall. And that's because global oil prices have declined in the last 3 months. So it's bad luck if you are in Melbourne, while Perth will see a spike overnight before falling over the next week. It means a Christmas road trip, Janice, might be a little more affordable for many.
Bring on the green on the screen. Thanks so much, Ricardo. Well, it's estimated that more than 3.7 million households in Australia have experienced food insecurity over the past 12 months. That's according to Foodbank's annual hunger report. Many Australians are seeking relief for the first time, including people with full-time jobs and mortgages. Charities are trying to help by handing out donated food that would normally go to waste.
Customers at this food pantry are stocking up on free food. It's a scene that's become the norm for many Australians under financial pressure. Here, they're lining up before the doors have even opened. Oz Harvest says that demand is high.
If we think about last year, this time, we now see 20% increase in customers that are coming and seeking our service. That would be around 2,100 customers that we see every single week.
And the food provided is appreciated.
I mean, it's edible, you know.
Oz Harvest takes unsold fresh fruit and vegetables from supermarkets before they're used by date and distributes the food to charities across the country. People here say the rising cost of groceries mean they can no longer afford to buy food at the supermarket.
A little sweet because of, you know, it's too expensive to shop around.
It's estimated that 1 in 5 shopping bags goes to waste. In Australia, that's 7 million tonnes of food each year. Clients here at Oz Harvest see themselves as food waste warriors, making use of good food and also having something ready for Christmas Day. This holiday season, many Australians are changing their spending habits and cutting back on buying gifts. Advocates are urging the federal government to support people on low incomes who are bearing the brunt of this crisis.
We're calling on the government to increase funding to community services to be able to support people in times of need, and also to look at ways to reduce energy costs for people on the lowest incomes.
Charity groups say they're not only just providing food, but also a place of friendship.
It's a big part of what customers come for, the food and as well the connection. And where most than during the Christmas time.
Some relief for families under pressure in the festive season. Marcella Sinalunga, SBS World News.
Still to come, the Socceroo hanging up his boots while he's calling time on his international career. And Mitchell Starc and Pat Cummins react to an $8 million Indian cricket payday. The governor of the US state of Texas is facing growing challenges after passing new laws that target migrants. The new Republican-backed law will allow police to arrest, prosecute and deport people. And while this story refers to people crossing into the US illegally, it is not a crime under US federal law to seek asylum, according to the International Rescue Committee.
The ACLU and the state of Texas likely heading to court over the situation at the border with Mexico. On Monday, Republican Texas Governor Greg Abbott signing a new law known as SB 4, which allows for local and state law enforcement in Texas to arrest and deport people they suspect crossed into the U.S. illegally. It carries a punishment of up to 6 months in jail, and repeat offenders could face up to 20 years in prison, and it gives judges the ability to deport them back to Mexico. The new law has exceptions at places of worship, schools, and healthcare facilities. Abbott blasting the president, saying Texas needs to defend itself from drug cartels, accusing Biden of deliberate inaction. Biden says the federal government, not individual states, is charged with determining how and when to remove non-citizens for violating immigration laws. The ACLU and the Texas Civil Rights Project filing a lawsuit against SB 4, claiming the new law violates the Constitution.
It will impact our communities. It will impact our community safety. It will separate families. And that is just a reality that we cannot abide by. The state of Texas cannot impose its own policy preferences.
The Mexican government also taking steps to challenge this. Mexico's president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, calling the law inhumane and politics related. There are still questions as to how exactly SB 4 will be implemented, but it is set to go into effect in March.
Melissa Arden with that report. Well, Australia's pace duo of Mitch Starc and Pat Cummins have raked in over $8 million between them and smashed Indian Premier League auction records. Starc edged out the Australian captain in his move to Kolkata, while fellow Aussie Travis Head will join Cummins at Sunrisers Hyderabad.
Sandwiched between the first and second tests against Pakistan, it was India, and more precisely cricket's most powerful Premier League, that was on the minds of Pat Cummins and Mitchell Starc overnight.
Sold. What a welcome back for Mitchell Starc.
After Cummins had been hired by Hyderabad for a handsome $3.67 million, he was then upstaged by Starc and the Kolkata Knight Riders. Both men greeted fans of their new clubs.
Hey KKR fans, I'm thrilled to be joining the team for this year's IPL, and I can't wait to get to Eden Gardens to experience the home fans, the home crowd and the atmosphere. Look forward to seeing you then. Ami KKR.
I've heard a lot about the Orange Army. I've played at Hyderabad a few times and always loved it, so can't wait to get started. Great to see another Aussie, Trav Head, over there as well. So I think we're going to have a lot of fun in this season and hopefully plenty of success.
Stark has skipped the T20 tournament since 2015 due to a combination of injury and workload issues. But as of next season, he'll be making up for lost time. Should he play in all 14 games starting next March and bowl his allotted 4 overs per game, it'll equate to $13,184 for each and every delivery. Travis Head wasn't quite in Cummins and Stark's earning territory, but his World Cup final heroics saw him snapped up by the Sunrisers for just over $1.2 million. It'll be a big 48 hours in the Stark household. His wife Elisa Healy is about to lead Australia in the first test of the multi-format tour of India. Many of the squad haven't ever played at the stadium, including vice-captain Talia McGrath.
At Wankhede Stadium, I personally never played here before, and all our stats and analysis, all the data we're going off isn't really women's cricket games. So, yeah, a lot of it's just been since we landed. We've been really lucky being able to train out here.
After tomorrow's 4-day test, 3 one-day matches and 3 T20 games will follow. John Baldock, SBS World News.
Socceroos midfielder Massimo Luongo has announced his retirement from international football. He was part of 2 World Cup squads as well as the victorious Asian Cup winning team of 2015. Luongo also played in the 2019 tournament, but after suffering injuries in recent years, he's now helping Ipswich Town's push for promotion to the Premier League. The 31-year-old cited a desire to prolong his club career as a factor in his decision. Former Socceroos goalkeeper turned football pundit Mark Schwarzer believes Ange Postecoglou would be the perfect fit for Manchester United. After the Australian's strong start to life in the Premier League as Tottenham manager, Schwarzer says United's current struggles under coach Erik ten Hag would make Postecoglou an ideal candidate at Old Trafford. Manchester City has reached the final of the Club World Cup with a good win over Urawa Red Diamonds. It was a comfortable 3-0 victory for the treble winners, despite being without.
Happy to get the final against Fluminense. So, yeah, it's the last step to, to win the title, the only title that the club don't have, and yeah, go for it.
And another Manchester City star, Matilda's forward Mary Fowler, is back home for Christmas. She's helped her side into second spot in the Women's Super League, and her growing fame was also seen her unveiled as a childcare ambassador today. Coming up, the weather details and an out-of-this-world cat video. To the weather forecast now, and lows and troughs will bring heavy showers and storms to the Northern Territory's top end, as well as Western Australia's northeast and interior, Queensland and New South Wales. Strong southerly winds are likely to persist along the New South Wales coast, bringing showers to the major centres now, and wet, showery and windy ahead for Sydney, partly cloudy in Canberra and Melbourne. Overcast skies in Hobart, the sun will shine in Adelaide, partly cloudy in Perth, a shower or 2 possible, storms as well for Darwin, and showers to hit Brisbane. Checking conditions further afield now, partly cloudy in Port Vila, thunderstorms ahead for Nundy, a few showers on the way for Noumea, partly cloudy in Auckland and windy in Wellington. To Southeast Asia now, partly cloudy skies in Bangkok and Phnom Penh. Some thunder ahead for Kuala Lumpur and Singapore. Rain to hit Dili and Honiara. Heading further north now, fine and bright skies for Beijing and Seoul. Cloudy in Shanghai. Some drizzle ahead for Taipei and cloudy in Manila. Heading west, wet and showery in Beirut. Fine weather and clear skies for Tehran. Partly cloudy in Islamabad and foggy in Mumbai. To Europe now, wet and rainy in Stockholm and Moscow, cloudy skies in London, fine and bright in Paris, foggy in Rome and showers for Athens. To Africa now, partly cloudy skies for Algiers, Addis Ababa and Nairobi, unsettled and thundery in Johannesburg. To South America now, rain ahead in Bogotá, some thunder to roar through La Paz, partly cloudy skies in Rio, some drizzle in Asunción and Buenos Aires. And for North America, drizzle and gloomy weather in Vancouver and San Francisco, overcast skies in Chicago, fine and clear in Denver, showers for Dallas and a few showers to soak the streets of Havana. Well, the Northern Territory Labor caucus has met and unanimously decided who the next Chief Minister will be. The member for Drysdale, Eva Lawler, will be sworn into her new position tomorrow. The change comes after Natasha Files resigned after it emerged that she failed to disclose shares in a manganese mine. And finally, for an out-of-this-world cat video. The first video transmitted by laser from deep space of a cat chasing, what else but a laser beam. The 15-second video featuring an orange tabby cat named Taters was beamed to Earth by NASA from a spacecraft about 30 million kilometres away. The video was received faster than most broadband internet connections here on Earth, and it's raising hopes of improving communications from deep space. The cat, of course, remained safely here on terra firma on Earth. Recapping our top stories now, Australia has joined the European Union and NATO in condemning Houthi rebel attacks on vessels in the Red Sea. But Anthony Albanese hasn't explicitly said whether or not the government will send a warship to the region. Colorado's Supreme Court has declared that former US President Donald Trump cannot run for president next year, citing the Constitution's insurrection clause. And water is subsiding, but a long road to recovery still lies ahead for communities in far north Queensland hit hard by this week's flooding. That's the world this Wednesday. If you missed any of tonight's bulletin, you can always catch up on SBS On Demand. And for the top stories, head to the SBS News website. Liz Maddock will be back with our next bulletin at 10:25 tonight. For now, from the World News team, good night.